It's too difficult question that I'm trying to get to, but just, those are things that actually need changes in people's perceptions, ways of beliefs.
You can't write a law that everybody hates.
Yeah, that's
it's like we didn't, although we need laws that change things. I mean, if you take an issue like, say, the homosexual law reform bill, there's still a lot of homophobia. We needed to change the law, but we need to educate our populations out of our, quite conservative and abusive attitudes on both, issues like, well, mine one is equal pay, women. Yeah.
On the Green Party website, it says regarding trade policy and Māori that the Green Party believes tangata whenua should have the right preserved to protect themselves from trade and investment related exploitation. So I was wondering what sort of that meant in real terms of what the Green Party thinks should be done to ensure that happens.
Well, it comes back to the issue of opposing free trade agreements, because the intellectual property rights of Māori are compromised by many of those agreements. And it's about working with, like, it's not for the Green Party, which has some Māori members but is predominantly a Pākehā party, to start telling Māori how to operate in terms of trade. But we do support the leadership that came from Māori, particularly over the multilateral allied agreement on investment, which was the previous free trade one that we managed globally to scuttle. There was a lot of Māori leadership. We need to stand beside them so that they can protect their own rights. That's our job.
Okay. Have you got a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Sure.
Also, in the same part of your website, it talks about asserting positive sovereignty in trade, and I wondered how that relates with being able to protect internationally Māori rights if New Zealand asserts positive sovereignty and almost withdraws into itself.
I'm not quite sure what you think, what your concern is there, because if you're talking about us not wanting to be part of unfair trade and tangata whenua also saying the same thing, then you have tangata whenua and government saying, both, or not government unfortunately, but the Greens anyway, both saying that we don't want to do that. So what is your concern that what...
If New Zealand isn't involved in the international sphere and isn't
we
party
will be,
to
obviously.
conventions, then we've got no say in protecting them. It almost seems that in order to protect the things that matter to New Zealand from other countries, we need to be more involved with other countries.
Well, we should be more involved with other countries. I'm campaigning right now on trying to get the Indonesians to stop killing the West Papuans on a daily basis. We are actively involved in international stuff. I mean, there's a difference between unfair trade and international involvement. I mean, we are a small country that clearly is going to have relationships all around the world, and Māori exporters are a growing part of that. But when it comes to unfair so-called free trade agreements, that's not the only way that we can operate as an international player. And I think it's the TINA principle that Roger Douglas dragged into this country. There is no alternative way. There are millions of alternative ways of operating. And one of them is to operate from a place of ethical and fair and actually economically sustainable. And that's what we can do in our international trade and our local relationships. It's just about applying those principles in a practical way.
Okay, we've got another question down the front here.
Okay, wonderful. Biculturalism, great. How about multiculturalism, and where does that fit into that frame?
Sure.
Okay, interesting question. A lot of people wonder this sort of thing.
Yeah. I think that it's one of those false contradictions that if you say you're committed to the treaty and recognising the Indigenous people, that means that you don't recognise the other citizens. And what the treaty does, it says there is tangata whenua and tangata tiriti, people of the treaty, and that includes all cultures that are non-Indigenous. So that includes the Pacific nations. Now, the Pacific nations are the most discriminated against in terms of racism. Actually, Asian people experience a lot of racism, but Pacific nations, a lot of the people there were brought here as cheap labour, and they are still treated as cheap labour, and they experience a lot of oppression. And we have multicultural nation, that's the reality, but we have to decide whether we're going to recognise the treaty at the core and then recognise all our citizens. And I think that's the challenge now.
So are you saying that in recognising the treaty and putting it at the centre, we can be multiculturalist, and that's the way forward rather than biculturalism?
I'm saying that within the treaty, I don't actually think biculturalism is a very meaningful term,
right, so
or multiculturalism. I don't really think that's what it's all about.
I guess for a lot of ethnicities or certain groups, they feel that the bicultural sort of mode of doing things is leaving them out. And when people talk about biculturalism as opposed to multiculturalism, some Asian New Zealanders, Pacific New Zealanders are feeling that they are being marginalised.
Well, I think they perhaps might want to read the treaty and actually go through an education process. And I don't say that lightly, because I know that some of the, say, refugee and migrant groups have got great treaty education processes for new migrants who come into the country. And often new migrants embrace the idea that there was an Indigenous treaty signed and that they have rights more easily than Pākehā New Zealanders. And I've taught treaty for 20 years. Often it's Pākehā New Zealanders who are the most resistant, whereas new migrants are excited about a new country. They're prepared to recognise the Indigenous rights, and they're also prepared to recognise that they have a place under that treaty as well. So it's about education and celebration of culture, but it's not about anyone taking away the rights of the Indigenous.
Okay, another question at the back, right at the back.
But on the basis of like the first authentic principle of the treaty, which we've just been learning about, isn't it about one people and being one people?
No. Which version of the treaty were they trying to teach you?
It was in legal history.
Well, did they teach you the English version, or did they teach you the version that was signed at Waitangi in Te Reo Māori? Because there's an interesting principle of international law called contra preferendum. I thought it was a contraceptive, but it turns out what it is it's actually that the original treaty that should be upheld is the one that is signed in the Indigenous language, understood by the Indigenous people, which kind of makes sense if you're making a treaty with people in their country. And that first principle is not we are one people. That first principle is that we recognise the rangatiratanga of the tangata whenua.
So,
I mean, who's one people anyway? What does that mean? Are we all one anything?
Well,
so
coming from New Zealand myself, like my great-grandparents from New Zealand, I don't feel like I have any European rights.
No.
And so when I have to say I'm a European New Zealander,
well,
it doesn't
not.
make sense.
You're a Pākehā. Great, I'm a Pākehā. Wonderful thing about being a Pākehā, this is the only part of the world where we can say I'm a Pākehā. My family came here in 1847, and I have no Māori whakapapa, and I'm not a European, and I always write on the census Pākehā, because that's my celebration, that I live and try to live in right relationship with Indigenous people with unique culture called Pākehā. We're unique people, Pākehās. We do things differently.
So in the census coming up next year or whatever it is, there'll be an option to tick New Zealander.
That's a nationality, not an ethnicity. That's where people are so confused.
You think it's not a valid
Well, it's totally valid. We're all New Zealanders, but our ethnicity is Pākehā, Māori, Chinese, Samoan.
But isn't ethnicity a self-ascribing thing? In that you are what you think you are?
Yeah,
and if someone thinks they're a New Zealander, they are a New Zealander, in terms of their ethnicity? Well,
I just think that's fine, but it's not accurate, because that's your nationhood. Your nationality is New Zealander. Your ethnicity is your culture. A New Zealander isn't one culture.
Okay.
It's actually a lot of cultures, as we were just discussing.
Okay, we've got a question.
This is partly from Twitter, but also from myself. Well, the person on Twitter has said, what do you think of the Speaker's decision to ban the New Zealand Herald staff from Parliament?
Yeah, interesting.
But also, I just was wondering, with the kerfuffle in Parliament the other day, and also with Sue Kedgley's valedictory speech, where she talked about the way that parliamentary business is kind of conducted. I just wondering what you thought about it.
Yeah, the abusive, confrontational.
Okay, just for a precursor to that, the news today is that the Speaker has banned the New Zealand Herald journalists from Parliament for 10 days, I think it is, or 2 weeks, on the basis of Audrey Young publishing a photo from her mobile phone of the protest the other day.
The guy that who tried to throw himself. Yeah.
Which breaks the parliamentary rules against... Oh my
God. I mean, to me, it's all a bit... Like, Lockwood needs to get a life. Right. Like, really, we're not a a boys' boarding school. Like, Parliament's like a bad boys' boarding school. It's full of these really, obscure, weird rules about things. And we do need to have a framework of operating, and the media does need to be respectful. But, I mean, I don't see what that was such a crime.
Do you think women have different experiences in Parliament to men?
Yeah, they do. I don't even want to tell you some of the experiences. I mean, the rudeness and the sexism that exists amongst some parliamentarians still would surprise the audience.
Okay, I mean, because you've done this interesting experiment. Yes. Okay, here's your chance. Yeah. One example's being asked for.
All right. I won't name names, but I was in the coffee shop and I said to a member of the government, your position on foreign aid is doing really bad things in the Pacific right now, and he said, well, at least they shave their legs, Catherine. That's the level. It's sophisticated. That's why I did Housewatch. You probably know
so
about
tell us about Housewatch.
Well, Housewatch was, and I'm not doing it so much now because I realise I can't hear properly and get all the front bench because of where I'm sitting, so I can't really do Housewatch in the way that I want to, which is to be fair to all the people. But what I was tweeting all the abusive comments that weren't about parties or policies, and I did a lot of it for about 6 months. I tweeted all the nastiness, whoever it was, who said nasty personal comments, because it's like if a short person stands up in Parliament, they go, stand up, you know, and if somebody's known to be on mental health, like to have a mental health problem at the time and on medication, take your medication. I mean, this behaviour would not happen. I come from the community sector. I was a youth worker. People don't speak like that.
Okay.
So that's why I did Housewatch, because I actually think it's unacceptable.
So, but you've finished this now. You're not doing it anymore?
No, I'm still doing it, but the sound in Parliament is really problematic. And what I've realised is that the abuse between, say, Trevor Mallard and John Key, which happens along the front bench, because I'm sitting at the back, I can't hear it. And so what I'm doing is it's really a bit unfair because I'm house watching all the people, the back benches that I can hear, but not the front bench.
So who are the worst from each party?
Well, I got into trouble by saying this
Wow.
last year. Paul Quinn has got to be up there because it's not that he's very witty, he's not. He's just like at a rugby game, and so he sits at the back and goes, you know. So that's his approach. So,
Labour?
Labour, well, probably Trevor, but I can't hear everything he says, which is annoying because I went to school with Trevor and he was a very quiet boy, and now he's turned into a sort of like a tech dog.
The smaller parties?
The smaller parties are generally good. I mean, that's the thing about ACT, Māori Party, Mana, Peter Dunn. I mean, you know, whatever the haircut, he doesn't do abusive personal comments. And it's the same with us. We don't do it. So generally speaking, we're
So there's no one in the Greens you've had to have a quiet word to? You know, I think you're being a bit mean there.
I did have a quiet word to Russell Wynn. It was really funny, but I had to laugh because Stephen Joyce was attacking Gareth over transport, and everyone was interrupting Stephen Joyce, and Russell yelled out, "Let the dinosaurs speak!" And I thought that was a bit rude, but it was funny.
Okay.
Because he is a dinosaur on roads, Stephen Joyce.
Oh, okay, so it's more about his ideology.
Yeah,
than
totally.
his
It
age
wasn't really
or,
that he was saying that Stephen Joyce had any physical resemblance to a dinosaur. I mean, Russell would never say that, you know? It was more about the ideology.
Okay. Now, someone's asking on Twitter, sorry. Oh no, I missed that. But we're talking about ethnicities. Is there any country that can have one people in it? I mean, if you look at somewhere like England, are they one people? Or
No. I mean,
England
is living with the consequences of having colonised the entire world and stolen most of their resources. And my grandfather was in India doing this. So they've now got a vast multicultural society. I mean, it's not. I mean,
but
I don't
can
know.
you not have multiculturalism within one people?
Well, within a nation you can, but that doesn't mean one people in this country, and in every country that's been colonised, one people is a stick used by the dominant culture to beat everybody else into submission. That's why I don't support the idea of one people, because one people means do it the way we do it. Be like us. Be whatever culture you are, so long as you act like us. And acting Pākehā is what is expected. Otherwise, you're allowed to be good at rugby and singing, but you're not. The rest of the time, you've got to act Pākehā. And I don't want us to all act Pākehā. You know, it's not rich, it's not just, and it's not fair.
Okay, in each vote chat we ask the MP their personal stance on a number of social issues.
Yep.
The big one, which Don Brash has sort of made even more newsworthy, is
Go Don.
should we decriminalise or even legalise drugs? Marijuana in particular.
Much as it pains me to agree with Don Brash on anything, I do think that the decriminalisation, which has been our policy for years, and harm reduction is the only sensible approach, particularly to cannabis.
Okay, I mean it seems